You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and this is the show where you get expert advice about the heavy duty parts you buy and sell and keep you informed about what's happening in the industry. Do you want to save money on fuel? We're excited to announce that we have another giveaway, and this time it comes from EcoFins. Now, EcoFins are a vortex generator that creates a drag reduction system that lowers your fuel consumption. Go to heavydutypartsreport.com to sign up and start saving fuel today. As the technology in heavy-duty trucks continues to advance, parts manufacturers are always innovating, and they're trying to provide fleets and operators longer-lasting parts that perform at the highest level possible. We think about trucks all over North America operating in very harsh conditions and a really wide range of different conditions. The suspension system in a heavy-duty truck is one of those foundational systems. Without that working properly, it creates all kinds of problems. So in this episode, we're going to talk specifically about how to choose the correct polyurethane components to keep your suspension working at optimal levels. To educate us on everything polyurethane related, I'd like to introduce you to Walter Schnapp, Business Development Manager for Energy Suspension. Now, they're an expert on heavy duty and industrial applications. Walter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie. Much appreciated.
So let me ask you something. Let's get started with a really highly technical question. What's polyurethane?
So polyurethane is a synthetic elastomer. It was developed back in the 30s in Germany, basically to take the place of rubber, just because that was in short supply. It has a lot of properties that make it a superior material to rubber for what we're talking about as far as vehicle applications and otherwise. But it's molded differently. It's made of different types of chemicals. It has some properties that make it, like I said, very conducive to what we do, and it's pretty excellent as far as for what we're using it for.
So what are the real differences in performance characteristics of polyurethane over other materials that people use?
Well, from the standpoint of longevity, a polyurethane part, is going to last far longer than a rubber part of the same type. For vehicle applications specifically, polyurethane has a better rebound rate. It keeps its shape better. It's something where the abrasion resistance is far superior to a rubber part. The chemical resistance is a lot better than a rubber part. So for example, an on-the-road trucker who's on the roads up in Canada, a lot of salt, a lot of other stuff on the roads, that'll tend to break down a rubber part, whereas a polyurethane part won't be affected in the same way. So for the longevity aspect, that's really a big plus. But also because of kind of the nature of the material, like I said, it's also something where you'll also see increased performance and handling in a lot of instances. Energy was kind of built on the brand. The brand was kind of built on the performance applications that we do, like for various different automotive stuff. So when you're talking about handling and in a competition or otherwise, that is something where you kind of really see the value. But in a heavy duty application, you still get those same values with the good handling and then really excellent longevity. So
it always amazes me how much of the technology that we use in vocational applications kind of starts in the race world. When you push those machines to the limits, you learn things. And that seems to be like a real advantage when you then take that knowledge, you take what you learn and you apply it to work trucks like what we do in heavy duty.
It's exactly right, Jamie. As far as with stuff that, if it needs to last and needs to, be withstanding of the most extreme conditions, and then you figure out what that is. And yeah, it's so like I was saying, with energy, I mean, we make parts for automotive, for UTV, for motorcycle, but it all has the kind of the same across the board values as far as what the end user is getting, as being, the performance and longevity. So yeah, it's good stuff.
If you left my town and on a good long day of driving, you would go through at least 3 different kinds of terrain if you were heading south. So you cross over the Rocky Mountains. You start off in the tundra of northern Alberta. You cross the Rocky Mountains. You enter into just a standard northern hemisphere forest. But before long, you've entered a semi-desert area, and then when you get close to Vancouver, you're in an actual rainforest, all in one day's worth of driving. When I think about those conditions from extreme cold to extreme heat, and when you think of how many miles a truck puts on, in the US, it's really not any different. You could be in the deserts and then you could be in the mountains all in the same day. It's got to be important to have the right parts, the right bushings to be able to stand up to that.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, like going through all of those different climes, I mean, you're having huge temperature changes. You're having, different, chemicals that you're encountering on the road. Like I mentioned, salt. I mean, there's other stuff that you'll also encounter that would be degradative to a rubber part. So yeah, and having that, ability to work in all climates. Our parts actually work to -60 Fahrenheit, or before, we've tested them. That's as low as we've tested them without any kinds of, and haven't had any issues as far as that goes. So it's something where, yeah, the polyurethane is definitely good as far as the adaptability of, different harsh environments.
Yeah, that's like the joke, right? My American friend came to visit Northern Canada and he says, "What temperature is it?" I said, "-50." And he says, "Is that Fahrenheit or Celsius?" And we say, it doesn't matter at that temperature. So how does polyurethane affect cost per mile? So I know it's not like a wear part like brakes specifically. I know that polyurethane costs more, but it does more for you. So talk about cost per mile, talk about lowering, instead of maybe cost per mile, we're actually talking about total cost of ownership.
Right. Well, Jamie, for example, yeah, as you said, you're correct. A polyurethane part will be more expensive. Our parts are all made here at our facility that I'm at right now. The material is pure polyurethane. We don't use additives and fillers like other manufacturers sometimes do. So we're really, really concerned about longevity and quality. With something like a wearing bushing on a truck suspension, with a rubber part that you're going to be replacing at a much more frequent interval than a polyurethane part, labor and cost of labor and other, the part itself, that will definitely be higher with a rubber part. Because for example, if you go 500,000 miles with a rubber part and you have to have your truck, suspension torn apart and replaced, and had you gone with a polyurethane part, you wouldn't even be thinking about it at that point. It would still be working and functioning as it's supposed to. With our parts, they're all greasable. So sometimes when, after so many miles, we say every 3 or 4 years, you re-grease them. But as far as the part, it'll retain serviceability, almost indefinitely. So if you're okay with the increased cost at that point where you replace it, where you have to replace it anyway, why not go with a polyurethane part? Because you're not going to have to think about it again. Whereas a rubber part, you certainly will.
Yeah, I think that's so important for people to really understand, is that yes, the purchase price is higher. So yes, it's going to cost you more today to buy that part. But the minute we start talking about labor at $125 an hour, whatever the shop is charging, $140, $150 an hour, I mean, to be able to look at that cost, you just can't lose going with a higher quality product.
And this is your vocation. As far as the truck goes, keeping it on the road and uptime is everything in heavy duty. It's lost business when your truck is in the facility getting replaced. So with a polyurethane part, it's something where you're not going to have to worry about it as frequently. So, the value is definitely much greater than doing a rubber part. And with the fact that the parts are usually ones that with pretty much every instance, I've been here for about 2 years. I haven't yet to hear of any kind of failures of, as far as heavy duty parts that are, being used in current operations. So we're very proud of the longevity of our parts. So save money in the long run, definitely using a poly part.
You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and we've been speaking with Walter from Energy Suspension. Now, Walter, as a repair technician, what signs indicate that a bushing may need to be replaced? What should we be looking out for?
Well, bushings are much akin to like cartilage in your body, to use that kind of analogy. So it's something like If you're seeing excessive movement in the suspension, if it's something shaking, also if you're noticing handling issues, sometimes you can actually see the rubber bushing itself, or if it's a poly bushing, sometimes you can see the actual part starting to degrade. With the rubber parts, that's typically what you'll see is, it'll start to get, start to see cracks. You'll start to see that it's quite dry. But any excessive movement, any kind of play in the suspension, anything like that would probably be indicating that it's ready to get replaced.
As you talk about that, it makes me think of many times when I was a salesman for selling heavy duty parts. The mechanics would be very, very frustrated at times with the drivers because the drivers didn't communicate that they had noticed something was changing in the way the truck was performing. So drivers, your truck, what it should feel like. And if it doesn't feel right, let somebody know, have them check it out, because you might be able to save a catastrophic failure then.
Right. And, and oftentimes, like I was saying, like when there's with going back to the body analogy, when you have an issue with with a joint or something where the bushing is failing, you'll start to have increased wear on the other parts, on your equalizer beams or what have you. So it's much cheaper to replace a bushing than replacing a huge metal component, and just labor and all the other stuff that goes along with that.
Okay, so our drivers have listened, they've communicated with our repair technicians. Our repair technicians have diagnosed the problem correctly. They come into the parts store and they lay down a worn out bushing that's rubber that has failed sooner than it should have, and they need to replace it. What does the parts person need to know? How does a parts person communicate with the customer to really get the value of buying polyurethane?
Well, with most of with energy suspensions parts, we have an extensive crossover knowledge of all of that. So if the customer is aware of what the part came out of and everything, we can identify that and be able to tell them exactly what part they need.
You mean like, okay, I know it's a Hendrickson suspension, and that's going to lead me to, and I know, I'm working on, like you say, a beam or something, or a drag link or something like that, whatever the part is. If you know the part and you know the suspension, you'll be able to cross-reference it.
Yes, that's correct. And some instances we get weird part numbers, but we have a really great team here. We can usually figure out what it is fairly quickly. We really pride ourselves on good customer service. So if it's something where we're, having, drawing a blank on something, we have, a lot of experience in drawing that we can usually figure it out. But being able to find out, just it's something that's usually the easy part, is identifying what needs to go in there. But then the next step is for the parts person to, make that value proposition as far as to the driver or whomever it is, that you should go with you shouldn't replace it with an OEM rubber part, or a competing rubber part, just because you're going to be back there again much more quickly than with the polyurethane part.
Right. So it's time for an upgrade. It's going to last longer. It's going to cost you less in the long run, less downtime. You should go with this part. So really, parts people should be offering the polyurethane first. And if the customer absolutely demands that they want, the rubber part, well, that's fine. That's their prerogative. But they should really lead with polyurethane then.
If they care about longevity and the customer being, ultimately satisfied and having a good, healthy suspension, then yes, polyurethane all the way. One thing about energy suspension parts, and this is something that comes up sometimes, is that a lot of customers would rather have a black part that looks like a rubber part, just because, if you have, say, like a truck where you're just concerned about aesthetics. We make red and black parts. So with everything, as far as we make, if you want it to look like a rubber part, just get a black part. You can't tell the difference apart from the performance.
And is there just like a prefix or suffix or difference in part number to indicate that?
It will be our part number, and then at the end it'll have a G for black color. It's because we used to put graphite in our material. We don't do that anymore, but it's the G for black, the R for red.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we also make private label parts for various different manufacturers, and we do other special private label colors, and they get crazy with the greens and pinks and all that stuff. But
yeah, you see those at the car shows or the truck shows, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So polyurethane's not only used for suspension, but it's also used in other places. Can you give us another example?
Well, a great example is, say, this Kenworth motor mount here. This is one that we were quite proud of. So you can see that. Okay. So with this, it's this would fit on an older T600 and some of the other Kenworth applications. One great thing about polyurethane, or energy suspension specifically, because we're not the only ones making polyurethane. Our parts do not come bonded, which is something that really also improves longevity. So you see here, there's actually no bonding there. It's all just just fitted via the through bolts and the other parts in the chassis. So
So
there's
just a second for Walter. For those that are listening in and not watching on YouTube, he's showing us the motor mount, and he was actually able to just use his finger to pull the polyurethane part of the mount away from the bracket. So that's what he meant when he says it's not bonded.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, that's correct. So there's really, in part failure, a frequent thing is the elastome actually separating from the metal. That can't happen with any of our parts. So, the longevity, like I keep saying, is going to be far superior to another manufacturer.
So if there's one thing you'd like to leave people who are listening or watching today, what's that one thing?
We at Energy Suspension, we make everything like I said, at our facility in California. We are been in business since 1983. We are not as well known in the heavy duty industry as well as the automotive side. Like I mentioned, all of our car parts and UTV and all the other stuff, but we've got a lot to offer as far as on the heavy duty side. So anybody who's looking for help on that should definitely give us reach out and see what we can do for them.
You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and today we've been speaking with Walter Schnapp, Business Development Manager at Energy Suspension. To learn more, go to energysuspensionxd.com. Links are in the show notes. Walter, thank you for being on HDPR today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and I just like to remind everyone to focus on cost per mile and let's keep those trucks and trailers rolling. You can watch our next video. Make sure to click the like button, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.